for why you're all here today. This amazing topic and our amazing speaker, Kate. We're going to talk about how do you build customer relationships that unlock NRR. Now, if any of you follow me on LinkedIn, you may have seen a post that I popped in, I think it was yesterday, talking about a conversation that Kate and I recently had. And I talked about really having conversations with CS professionals where you have that moment where you identify their passion. And I had the privilege and the pleasure of speaking with Kate a couple of weeks ago, and I unlocked her passion. We started talking about relationships and the power that relationships have on the partnership and how they really orchestrate and impact long, sustainable relationships, and then also obviously business growth and impact. So I am thrilled to welcome today Kate Neal, Director of Customer Success at Staircase.ai, to talk to us about everything relationships. So Kate, thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, Kristi. I'm very grateful for the platform and the opportunity.
Wonderful. Well, I know that we're all going to be taking away a ton of awesome information today, so I'm super pumped. I've got my notebook and my pen ready. And so without further ado, I'm going to pass it over to you. I'm going to go off of camera, off of audio. I'll be in the chat watching all the wonderful questions come in. Again, for everybody, if you have questions for Kate, drop them in the Q&A. We'll get to them at the end. Otherwise, Kate, floor is yours.
Awesome. Well, thank you again so much, everybody, for joining, for the time. If you're catching it on the replay, really grateful that you took time out of your busy schedule to come and learn from what I've learned in my careers as a customer success professional. So just start off with a brief introduction, my street cred, so to speak, right? So I've been a customer success professional since 2011. This Staircase is my fourth startup where I've come in from the ground floor and built a customer success function and team from nothing. I am experienced mostly in the high touch enterprise SaaS B2B world. So that's where a lot of what I'm going to share today is geared to and comes from. I recently co-founded Simply Success with my friend LA, who's a Salesforce customer success leader. I'm an on-deck customer success fellow and a founding member of Brand 30. So would love to connect with you on LinkedIn and kind of continue the conversation there. True to CS form, I needed a sort of roadmap and agenda for today. So just wanted to give you some quick insight into where we're headed. The too long didn't read is basically everything relationships and B2B SaaS. Why are they important? What are our challenges to building them? Who should we be building relationships with? How do we build those relationships, right? And then also, how do we scale those, which I think is probably the most important question on everybody's mind. So that's where we're headed today. And let's get started by talking about why relationships are so important in SaaS. And what I've written here is sort of what I see as the SaaS success equation. And I think to really have a sustainable, successful business, you'll want to be, doing well in all of these areas, right? But I'm going to focus specifically today in that middle service area and specifically on building relationships, because I've found throughout my career that if you're able to build strong, deep, lasting relationships that add value to your customers, you can kind of make up for deficiencies in some of these other areas where you may still be trying to catch up. And I think that building relationships can really lend to long-time growth in your business. The way that I look at that human to human connection is really like investing. The results are going to compound over time. And I wanted to share this model of return on relationship that I see as sort of the relationship flywheel in the SaaS world, which is, you build the relationship, you build the trust. From there, you're able to provide continuous value. And ideally, that leads to mutual growth with your customer and your partnership, right? The more your customer can be successful, the more that you would be able to hopefully increase things like ARR, right? As they're growing, you can grow with them. And that really creates this cycle of building trust, providing value, and growing and kind of staying within that as you go. One thing that we've started to see in B2B SaaS, especially I think through COVID and kind of realizing in this remote first world how important relationships are. And when we don't have the ability to go face to face with folks, we sort of realized, how irreplaceable that can be. And even then, right, we've sort of adapted and been able to start to, grow and nurture relationships with people that we've never even met face to face. And that's something that's, we're really on the cutting edge of that, and something that we've all been kind of working together to develop. And what we're seeing with a lot of our customers and some of the partnerships that we're talking to is, when you are able to build multiple relationships with a customer, deepen and strengthen those relationships, we're seeing a strong correlation between both number of relationships, right, quantity and quality of relationships, having a really positive impact on things like NPS and NRR. So the more you can develop those relationships, you should start to see the fruits of those efforts in some of the areas where, especially us as customer success professionals, are really measured, right? What is that NPS score, the customer satisfaction score, and how are we able to not only just renew, but grow that business over time? There's a lot of challenges to building relationships, right? Especially at scale. And I'm going to kind of generally cover some of these, and then I'm going to dive into two of them specifically. So I'm going to skip the ones that I'm going to dive into specifically and kind of start with turnover, right? This is something that I'm sure we're all very familiar with, not only on the customer side, but your organization side as well, right? There's CSM turnover, there could be leadership turnover, and there's certainly customer stakeholder turnover, right? This is sort of an ever-changing and evolving world. Even though it's a little bit small, we do see that a lot of people, move from opportunity to opportunity. And so giving yourself a safety net for that turnover is something that's super key. And we'll talk about how to do that. I also mentioned, right, we're in a remote-based or remote-first world that's a little bit new to all of us. And so adapting to that, figuring out, how do we build relationships with people that we've never met face to face? I was thinking earlier about 2019, the year before COVID, I traveled 90,000 miles in the air for work, did a little bit of traveling for fun as well, but, basically ping-ponging all over the country to meet with customers face to face in order to build that relationship, develop that trust and rapport, and ideally see that lead to successful business results in our partnership. Well, we're not doing that anymore, right? Not only are we, staying safe and staying distance for COVID, but we're also seeing, in the world, the supply chain challenges and fuel challenges, and that's making the cost of that travel just increase exponentially. And so how do we adapt the way that we build relationships with customers for that remote first world? I think another challenge that we're all pretty familiar with is the lack of visibility or low visibility. And part of that is sort of that next challenge of disparate data sources. We've got, stuff in Salesforce, maybe stuff in our task management or our customer success platform. We've got emails, we've got meetings, maybe we've got stuff in Slack, right? There's really a lot of stuff going on, and it can be difficult, especially when you've got a lot of people in your organization also interacting with several people on the customer side. It's really hard to keep track of those engagements and kind of staying on top of what the heck is going on with this account. And that's something that as, a CS professional or a CSM, you're the quarterback of what's going on in the relationship. You're sort of orchestrating everything that's happening. And if you don't have visibility into that, it can be very challenging. And from a customer success leadership perspective, right, your team is out there in the front lines, in the weeds, right? But you don't really have visibility into that. And quite frankly, we don't need extra emails, right? We don't need to see all of that. But how do we know sort of at a glance or at a high level, what are those relationships? What's the status of them? And also what's the value of them? What are we getting? How can we prove the success of those relationships? So there's lots of challenges. And I want to talk specifically about these two other challenges, the many-to-many and the one-to-many. And I think these are really the biggest challenges that we face today, especially in a remote first world, and especially as we're trying to scale and potentially seeing rapid growth. If you look at the image on the left, This is what we call the many to many. You've got the customer in the center, and you've got several different stakeholders within that customer, right? You've got your end users, your decision maker, your champion, maybe you're talking to IT, et cetera. And around that customer, you've got a lot of people from your organization that may have some interaction with that customer. You've got your product team, your sales team, your marketing team, of course, your customer success team. And all of these interactions are happening across multiple channels. And so again, that goes back to, how do I keep up with this? How do I keep track of it? And how do I know sort of where the customer is encountering friction in their journey or in these engagements with my team, without having to read through every email and every interaction and maybe watch every meeting recording back, right? We know that we don't necessarily have time for that. And to complicate things, we also can look on the right side and see this one-to-many challenge. And we'll just look at this example of, you've got your CSM who has a book of business, could be anywhere from 10 to 20 customers, maybe more if you're in the SMB space. And within each of those customer accounts, you've got several different stakeholders. I don't know if anyone's familiar with the Dunbar number concept, right? But essentially what it says is that as an individual human, we can only hold so many relationships before we kind of lose grasp on that and lose handle on it. And so how do we, as customer success professionals, with that sort of Dunbar number limitation, how do we make sure that we're effectively building these relationships at scale? So those are some of the challenges. Talked about why relationships are important. Let's talk about who we build relationships with. And again, I'm focusing on my experience from high touch and enterprise SaaS. And I wanted to throw out sort of the 3 key personas that I make sure to develop in every account in my book of business. I want my team to develop these. Of course, the more the merrier. And I'll talk about that in some of the other slides. But these 3 stakeholder roles specifically are key to build. The first one is the champion. I'm sure we are familiar with that, right? It's generally our day-to-day contact at the customer account. It's someone who can influence the decision maker. It's someone who champions our partnership, our product, our service with their team internally. And it's someone who we can partner with on the change management and implementation and success of our partnership. Typically, this is also the person that if you can build that sort of close and personal relationship with, you'll get some feedback from them that's a little bit more casual and a little bit more forthright and upfront than maybe if it was just, sort of a dry professional relationship. And so the champion is really your key player. I see it as, the CSM's sort of partner in crime in making sure that there's success on both sides of that relationship. In addition to the champion, we have our decision maker. The decision maker is the person who signs the check, right? They're the one who gets the final yes, no say on the partnership, the product, the service, the renewal, right? And a lot of times I see, customer success teams in this pitfall of only coming back to the decision maker when it's time for the renewal, right? So they haven't heard from you in, upwards to a year, and you're coming back around and asking potentially for even more money than what you had spoken about last time. And I think that's really missing the point of being able to develop that relationship and over time show the value that your partnership has added to their business. And so if you can drop those seeds along the way between, first signature and the next renewal, your decision maker's decision will be made easier by those sort of investments in the relationship that you bring to the table. We typically don't talk to the decision maker as much as the champion, but we need to make sure that we are nurturing and maintaining that relationship with the decision maker. They don't really usually care for the day-to-day tactical information. They would want to see at a high level how you can tie their business successes to things that have come from your service or your product or your partnership. And so really focusing on, what you've done for their bottom line and their business is how you can start to build that relationship with the decision maker. And the last relationship that I would call out here as something that I think you shouldn't be going without is the executive sponsor at the customer. Now, this is something that typically is best built to build the relationship with someone on your executive team, right? Think C-suite to C-suite. But typically the customer success professional is the one who plays that quarterback role with that relationship, right? Our C-suite is generally too busy to be keeping track of little things like, when was the last time they emailed with an executive sponsor at this customer? But as the customer success professional, this is a very key relationship to the success of your partnership. And so you ideally are keeping track for, your C-suite or whoever that executive sponsor on your end is, and helping them to nurture and facilitate that executive to executive level relationship at your customer, right? So making sure that you know when the last time that they met, and making sure that they're meeting more than just, once a quarter, a couple times a year at the QBR, right? That's again, a relationship that you want to be consistently nurturing by providing value add. And again, with the executive sponsor, it needs to be more high level. It definitely needs to be strategic. And it needs to be future facing, right? We need to be able to help them and encourage them and consult with them on how to make changes in their business that we know will yield great results. And oftentimes the best way to approach that is agnostic of your product or your service. Of course, we want to tie in what we can to that, but really taking an interest in their business success, their goals, and drawing from your other customer experiences of, hey, we've seen this work really well, or we had a customer, make this strategic direction change with their business, or, whatever the case might be that yielded better results, giving that guidance to the executive sponsor and letting them kind of make that decision. But knowing that you brought that to the table is key to, really becoming, as an organization, the trusted advisor that we as customer success professionals are always trying to position ourselves as, right? So it's like, not only do we need to be that strategic advisor to our accounts and to our stakeholders, we want to help position our company as a strategic thought leader and as a strategic partner to the business overall. All right. Couple other relationships to consider. And actually, let me just jump back real quick. One other thing I want to say, typically with a champion, I would recommend as a best practice to build at least 2 of those relationships, because like we talked about with the turnover, sometimes losing your champion can be extremely debilitating to the partnership, right? If they go to another department or to another company and you don't have anybody else there who truly understands the value proposition of your product or service, then you're going to be, fighting to catch up, fighting to develop a new relationship. And so if you kind of proactively groom, so to speak, a couple of different champions, that's going to behoove you if that turnover were to happen. So a couple of other relationships for you to consider that I think are important and should be developed, but I wouldn't focus all of your time and energy on them. I would really focus on, those key 3 players, or it could end up being 3 to 5 folks in those key roles. But you've also got your influencers who maybe aren't involved in the day-to-day or the tactical, but they do have some sort of influence generally with the decision maker or the executive sponsor on whether or not that relationship moves forward. And so that's, something to acknowledge. If you've got someone in your customer that seems to be taking that role, that's someone that you should develop a relationship with. And of course, as a CSM, naturally, you'll be developing relationships with your power users and your end users. You may also need to develop relationships with procurement or legal or IT or security. So again, making sure that you're keeping track of these relationships and identifying which ones to prioritize and where to spend your time is going to be extremely helpful in helping to move that relationship and the partnership forward. All right, so let's talk about strategies for building relationships. We've identified why they're important, who we need to build them with. So how do we build them? So I think about this in really 3 areas. Breadth or multi-threading, right? So that's quantity. It's how many relationships can you build or connect or facilitate between your team and the customer team. And the more, the merrier, right? Like we saw in the previous slide, the more relationships and the deeper, the higher the correlation between higher NPS and higher NRR. So don't put all your eggs in one basket. Don't hang your hat on one person. Get in there, get into the organization hierarchy, use an amazing tool like LinkedIn to develop connections, to develop, your own voice and expertise, and connect with different people at the customer organization. And I think also, as a customer success professional, being able to identify that you don't need to own every single relationship, but you do need to be the connector, right? If you've got a stakeholder at the customer that has a lot of great ideas for the product and product feedback, like hook them up with the product team, like make that connection and let that happen, right? You don't have to micromanage and be on top of everything, but you definitely need to be making sure that your team is developing relationships with the customer team with as many folks as you can. Sort of the next angle that I look at is depth, the quality of the relationship, right? I have to just stop and laugh. I don't know if this diver's outfit is giving anybody else like FloJo vibes circa 1985. I'm dating myself a little bit here, but I just love that one leg long, one leg short. Anyway, so paying attention to the depth in the relationship, right? That's your ability to move from that surface kind of face value, very professional, dry relationship to a personal and deep connection with someone, right? Knowing their kids or their pets' names, or knowing that they went on vacation and asking them how it went, right? Remembering little nuggets of information that you get from your customer. Something that I do is write all of them down, right? If I'm talking to a customer and they mention that, their kiddo is sick, I jot that down. And the next time we get on the phone, I say, hey, how's your kid feeling, right? And it's such a small thing, but it makes a big difference in the depth of the relationship, because they know that beyond what you're talking about with the business, you care about them as a person, as a human, and you're making that connection. And I think in that same vein, you want to be giving little nuggets of yourself to these relationships and to these folks, right? Share things that you did on the weekend, or, outside of work passions and hobbies that you have, because oftentimes that's how we can find connection. And the more of that connection that we can find, right, the more we can lean on that person when it comes to giving us information that might be helpful, kind of back channel for our partnership, right? If they're starting to hear that, they're questioning their tech stack internally, or about to issue some RFPs just to see what else is out there. If you've developed a close personal relationship with as many people as possible, you will probably hear that information before it's too late, right? Before you can get out ahead of it a little bit more. Early news is much better, even if it's bad, than being surprised by something. And the last angle that I look at relationships on is height, right? And luckily not like actual height for short people like me, but height in terms of, that organizational hierarchy. So like we were talking, that executive sponsor relationship, it's your ability to make sure that your organization has relationships at every level of that customer organization hierarchy, right? All the way from the end user, all the way up to the executive sponsor, and as many levels as possible in between. And again, as a CSM, you don't have to be the one holding all of those relationships, but make sure that someone at your organization is making those relationships at each of those levels. Because when it comes time to renew, or when you hit one of those road bumps of, hey, we're looking at other products to see what's out there, or we don't feel like the usage is high enough to justify this partnership continuing, the more people that you can kind of work in on your side internally on the customer's organization to kind of advocate for your partnership and your product, the better. And so I really think that if you look holistically at the relationships between your organization and the customer organization through each of these three lenses, you will position yourself to see those results of increased NPS and increased NRR. So once you've built those relationships, right? So what do you do? Like, how do you continue to make sure that you stay on top of them? And we've developed this relationship management framework here at Staircase, and kind of looks like this, right? You build your foundation, what we've been talking about. You segment your customers into tiers. And just a kind of side note on that, I've seen a ton of organizations segmenting their customers based purely on ARR. And I think if you're doing that, I would encourage you to go back to the drawing board a little bit, because doing so sometimes leaves out customers who have the opportunity to grow into a bigger account. And it also leaves out the maturity of the customer in terms of the industry or the product and service that you have, which also could limit you in terms of that future growth potential with the customer. So if you're only segmenting your customers by ARR, I would bring in a few other aspects and kind of redefine what those are to make sure that you can capitalize on opportunities to help, maybe customers who are smaller today grow into your enterprise customers tomorrow. Once you segment your customers into tiers, within each of those tiers and each of those customers, you want to map out those stakeholder relationships, right? We just talked about like the champion, the decision maker, the executive sponsor, and then also score those relationships. And if you look at the second under focus, the 1, 2, 3 that I have there, this is sort of how I think about scoring a relationship. You can also use a 1 to 5 scale, but I like to keep it simple with just 3. But really within each relationship, you're either going to have kind of a new or low engagement relationship that kind of moves into responding regularly, a little bit more personable, all the way to the 3, which is where we're all aiming to be, right? That trusted advisor, the person that your customer will pick up the phone to text if they have a question or if they've run into a business challenge. They're coming to you because they trust you and they trust the advice that you're giving them. And so once you've mapped out those key relationships, take a look at where they are today, right? Is it a 1? Is it a 2? Have you been able to get to 3? And then make a plan for how do you move your 1s to 2s and your 2s to 3s and start executing on that plan, right? And that's how you're going to strengthen and nurture those relationships. If you kind of consistently are monitoring and checking back in with that 1 to 3 scale and understanding, have I been able to move this 1 to a 2? If so, what do I need to do to take that 2 to a 3? And then, of course, using technology to help you do all of this is sort of the third prong in the relationship management framework, right? We are one people generally, and we cannot keep track of everything. And so I think getting some sort of technology data as a competitive advantage is super key. You want to make sure that you've got something that can help you measure, monitor, and track those relationships, right? Because oftentimes the squeaky wheel gets the grease, right? So you've got, your inbox and your meetings, right? But there's customers that aren't writing in, or you don't have a recurring meeting with. And oftentimes it's really easy to sort of let that fall between the cracks because they're just not top of mind. So making sure that you're paying attention to everybody and nurturing all of those relationships, even if they're quieter customers, is going to be key to making sure that that's like a long-term relationship. And I think one other point I'll make here that I've learned throughout my career is I thought a lot about the value of a customer, right? Lifetime customer value is a term that we all hear. And my understanding of it early on was sort of what value, like what is the value of this ongoing contract to my company, right? Like how long can we keep them as a customer? And that's really evolved for me over time and understanding, right? Going back to how there's a lot of turnover in this industry. The customer lifetime value is really, in my mind, a relationship lifetime value. And if you can develop a really good relationship and that person goes to another company, they will oftentimes want to bring you and that product and service into their new company. So they're not just championing for you at your current, their current company with your current contract there, but they may bring you to where they go. They may also introduce you to some of their peers, right? So really focusing on that relationship, not just in the context of what they're bringing to you today, but what's possible for the future. All right, so wanted to talk about some strategies and best practices for nurturing and strengthening a relationship, right? So how do you move them from a 1 to a 2? How do you move them to a 2 to a 3? So one thing that is super helpful for me is thinking about the Pareto rule, right? The 80-20 rule. How do we segment and prioritize our efforts to have the most impact? And I think that if you refer back to the 3 key stakeholder roles that we went over, and then that subsequent slide of here's some other relationships to consider, I would focus on those 3 relationships, right? 20% of those relationships that can drive 80% of the impact and value for that partnership. So the other relationships are key and you should build and nurture them. But when you're working on your punch list for the day or the week, or thinking through how do you prioritize, really focus on those key relationships that can bring the most impact. And I think also just apply that rule to everything that you're doing, right? As CSMs, your attention is pulled all over the place. As CS leaders, same thing. Really understand, from the list of everything that you do, all of the activities and actions that you take, what are the 20% of that drive the 80% of the value, and double down on that. It's very hard to do, right? Especially as CS professionals, we're sort of trained to kind of be the yes people and the catch-all people, and really being able to draw some boundaries and limit that down to what is the focused 20% that I can do that will drive 80% of the impact. So not only in how you approach relationship building, but also just how you approach your job in general, I really recommend. I think another way that we can make sure that we're building, deep and important relationships is avoid the empty reach out. I think that especially as CS has started to become more and more central in B2B SaaS, and, we've started to rely more and more on like tasks and workflow managements and playbook systems, right? Which are super awesome and helpful and needed to do our job. But we've gotten into this habit of kind of checking the box, right? And I can't tell you the number of messages that I've seen, throughout my career from CSMs to a customer saying, hey, just checking in. How's everything going? If you need any help, let me know. Which does check the box, right? You did reach out to the customer, but a big majority of those probably don't get a response. And the reason for that is it's not providing value to the customer. In fact, it's training them to only reach out to you if they have a problem, which if someone's only reaching out to you when they have a problem, that's the relationship that you're going to build, right? As the person who's kind of like the problem person and not the strategic business kind of consultative approach that I think we want to be doing, right? So to move to that trusted advisor position, it's better to not send something if you don't have anything to say than send an empty reach out. But you don't have to not send something, because we should always have some value to add. And I think if you Look at the value that you can add. Again, agnostic from your product or your service. That's where you're going to move yourself into the trusted advisor position, right? Stay up to date on industry news, right? Whatever vertical you're in, stay up to date on what people in that industry are saying on LinkedIn. Share that information with your customer, right? Send them a LinkedIn post, send them an article, tell them, we've seen this customer do X, Y, and Z, and it produced A, B, and C results. Let's talk about how we can maybe translate some of that into what you're doing. We should always be able to add value to every exchange that we send a customer. And then finally, I think just honing your soft skills is really important to building that relationship, right? Having emotional intelligence, being able to be empathetic. That doesn't come easy for everybody, but it's certainly something that you can practice and study and get better at over time. I think being personable and personal, right? Giving them those tidbits about you and your life and listening to the tidbits and the nuggets that they give you, and then later remembering. That goes a long way in, again, letting them know that you care as a person. I think another thing that I don't see enough CS professionals doing is sharpening your discovery skills and abilities, right? A lot of times customer success professionals can fall into this trap of just being like, yes, because we want to be helpful, right? We want to help, we want to serve, we want to not tell the customer no. But if you can develop the skills to dig into, for example, a customer request for a new feature, right? Well, what do you want to do with that feature, right? What is your business goal? What outcome do you want to see? That will help you understand, is that even the right feature request? Or can I provide some education or some industry knowledge or insight to help them understand, hey, there's a better way, or hey, maybe that's actually not the goal that you want to be shooting for, and here's why. So we do want to be positive and we do want to be helpful, but that doesn't mean that we say yes to everything that comes from the customer. And I think sharpening those discovery abilities will really help you, be able to kind of move from that yes person to that, again, trusted advisor. We don't do it a ton anymore, right? But being able to have good face-to-face connection and good communication, written, verbal, presentation skills. These are all things that we depend on as customer success professionals to deepen and nurture those relationships. So whenever you can, right? Listen to podcasts, read books, like talk to other people, connect on LinkedIn, learn from what other people are doing and how you can adapt those practices into how you do your job, right? Like I've read a ton of Brené Brown books, right? And I read them for like my personal life and, my development as myself as a human, but I couldn't help but translate those things that I've learned into how I approach my work, how I approach my relationships. And so, those being able to kind of improve those things in a well-rounded way will help you bring them to your work and your work relationships. So lastly, I want to talk about how do you scale, right? And really, we know that we scale with technology because we're only people and there's no way that we can keep track of everything. If you look at the image here, this just shows you that complexity. And this is just looking at one company and one customer account, right? You've got all of these nodes. The nodes are people with relationships all over it, just like a web. And within each of those interactions, right, there's some customer sentiment, there's some event or incident that has happened. And again, as the CS leader, it's impossible for you to really see all of that in real time, right? In terms of like being in every conversation or being CC'd on every email. It's just not realistic, right? So having technology that can look at all of those channels of communication and then analyze them, right? And that's something that we're doing at Staircase. And it's really exciting to me because it's, when I first saw Staircase and talked to Ori, our CEO, before I joined the team, I just kept saying, damn, I wish I had this 7 years ago, all through my CS career, because I would have been the boss at all of this relationship building. And, he laughed at me and he's like, well, the thing is that this couldn't have existed even up until, 2 or 3 years ago, because of those, we needed the advances in the technology, right? In the machine learning and AI and in natural language processing technology. And the exciting thing is that we have that now today, and we can start to leverage that technology to essentially be a CSM across everything that we're doing, and then deliver those human and relationship insights back to us so that we can take that feedback and use it to empower our human to human connection, right? Because that's really what it comes down to, is less automation and more human to human connection is really going to unlock that NRR for you, right? I know that a lot of us need to do some automation, but we've been on the receiving end of that as well. And if you think about how that makes you feel, right? It's just like, you just copy and pasted this and sent it to me, right? So we need to be able to balance those activities with more human to human connection. And technology is really what's going to help us get there. I think it also can help give you that holistic view, right? Both as a CSM and a CS leader across your book of business, or across, all of your customers in your book, understanding, what's happening, how is the customer feeling about it? When is the next event? Where are they in their journey? And then once you've got that visibility with that holistic view, you can start to have more complex insights, right? What are the areas of the journey that are more associated with negative sentiment from a customer? Or are there topics across customers that are associated with negative sentiment or positive sentiment, right? It's about both sides of the coin, being able to mitigate risks and capitalize on opportunities. And I think also being able to set benchmarks and trends with your technology is super important, right? As a CS leader, one of the things that I get asked a lot, and I have a hard time answering, right, is like, well, what is good engagement? Is it 5 emails and a meeting and 2 support tickets a week? Or is it something else? Technology can help look across a segment of customers and say, hey, for these tier 1 customers that are more mature in their business, or more, further along than maybe some other customers, this is sort of the benchmark of engagement that we can expect. And then you can assess each of those customers against that benchmark and understand what is your plan of attack depending on that information. And also, what is the trend, right? In CS, we can generally think of our book of business and say, they're happy, they're a little not happy, right? But that's generally like, in the last 2 weeks, or what's kind of currently happening. But it'd be much harder for the CSM to say, well, in the past 6 months, here's how that sentiment has trended, right? Here's areas where we've kind of faltered. Here's areas where we did really well. And being able to leverage technology to help you kind of take a step back and look at that bigger picture so that you can refine your engagement models and refine how you're interacting with your customers is super key. I want to leave some time for Q&A. So I think I will hand it back to you, Kristi, and thank you again, everybody, for listening.
Kate, that was awesome. I don't know if you were paying attention to the chat, but it was literally on fire.
Oh, good.
Everyone, I tried my best to just watch and copy questions over. Lots of fans of the information that you presented today. So thank you. Thank you. If you want to go to full screen, you can stop sharing your screen, and then that'll put us both there at the front, and we'll go through some questions. So again, now guys, we have 11 minutes. So we're gonna try to get through as many questions as possible. There's 11 questions in the Q&A, and there's a bunch that I captured from chat. We will do our very best to get through as many as possible. But Kate, where can folks find you? If we don't get to their questions, where can they come and find you so they can follow up with you later?
It may have gotten buried, but I did put my LinkedIn in the chat. So that's really the best place, or you can email me, Kate@Staircase.ai. That's about it. I'm not really a social media, so.
All right, let's get started. So I'm going to go through the Q&As. And again, thank you guys so much for dropping your questions in here. If you have them, please continue to add. We'll see how many we can get through. So first question from Stephanie. How do you find out where the negative sentiment's coming from? CSAT ? So is it, what types of surveys, or how are you capturing that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's sort of been the way that we've done it, is this point in time survey, which I think is a valuable tool, but it misses everything that happens in between. And that's where being able to leverage technology that can keep up with that and that analyzes all of the incoming customer communications on Slack and on email and in Zoom transcripts or wherever you're having your calls, right? And assigning a sentiment value to each of those, and then being able to roll that up into an overall sentiment or a sentiment trend over time. And then you can take a even, further step back from that and see that across all of your customers. Then you can start identifying those key areas where you need to make product adjustments or relationship and engagement adjustments, right? But you really need to have some sort of technology that is labeling sentiment of your incoming customer communications in order to get to that level, right? Because otherwise you're just depending on, the CSM being able to surface that. But when you've got a million back-to-backs and never-ending emails, it gets tough to do that.
Awesome. Thanks, Kate. All right, next question. This almost feels like a little softball for you. What tools are you using to help scale these human connections? You're using AI, ML, NLP. So I'll gift you that one, Kate. Tell us about it.
Yeah. I mean, listen, Staircase is, we're a pretty new company. We've been around a year. We're getting ready to kind of go to market with our product. I love our product. And that's what we do, right? We connect to all of your client communication channels, and then we analyze that data. We put it through machine learning and natural language processing, and we are able to identify the sentiment. And what's really cool about this technology is it's not just emotional sentiment, which I think is super important, because in general, we're all professionals and hopefully we're having professional communication even when we're upset, right? Sometimes it crosses that line. But so not only understanding the emotional sentiment, but the business context, right? I'm sure we've all gotten an email that was very nice and nicely written and said, "We've loved working with you, but we're going to cancel," right? Like, that's the worst thing to receive. They're very friendly and nice, but in a business context, that is not a good email or not a good signal to receive. And so that's something really cool about these new, natural language processing and machine learning technologies, is you can kind of take the different lenses and put them together into a business sentiment context.
Awesome. Thanks, Kate. And you know how I feel. I'm super excited to get my hands all over that someday.
Heck yeah.
All right. Another question. So we've got this one from Deb, and this is, I think, a good one because it happens to a lot of us. Any advice for how to strengthen a relationship that may have already been torn from another previous CSM or account team, where there's frustrations with product or roadmap, et cetera? So basically, how are we rebuilding a relationship that might be in a bad place?
Yeah. How do you repair? That's a great question. I think the best thing that you can do is listen to the customer. And if you know that there have been some damage to the relationship, I would just have a frank conversation with them and say, "Hey, I've heard from some folks on my team, or I've heard from some folks at your company or you directly, that you didn't have the best experience. And I just wanted to give you a minute to help me understand, what was your experience? Where did we fall short? And what would you like to see us do moving forward?" And that is so powerful, of giving them that voice and making sure that you're actively listening and they feel heard. And once you understand that information from the customer, then you make a plan of action for how can we make sure we never do that again. And then you continue to add value. And over time, those value adds and that active listening will repair that relationship, right? It's just like if, a personal relationship, right? If you accidentally offend a friend, you want to listen to them to understand what you did and then make sure you do something different moving forward.
Very good. All right. We've got a question from Thomas. Thomas asks, do you have any thoughts or opinions on a pooled CS supported model versus key digital touch versus one-to-many? So just on that approach, what are your thoughts there?
Yeah. So I think that one of the things that we've started to see in the evolution of CS is the CS team becoming more specialists and less generalists. And what I mean by that is, before we would just have a CS team. Well, now we have a CS team, and under that we have CS ops, CS enablement, right? Maybe technical account managers, support. So I think in that way, I like that evolution. I don't know that I see, at least again, I'm coming from that high touch enterprise world. And so a pool of CSMs to me doesn't seem like a good fit for that particular model. If you're in the SMB space, that might work super well. But when you've got a pool of CSMs, there's no clear owner, there's no clear swim lanes. And I find that clear ownership and responsibility is really helpful in making sure that there's someone owning what's happening in that relationship and that partnership. And so, I think even though the one-to-many and many-to-many come with challenges, I think there's a reason that we've still continued to maintain that practice in CS.
Awesome. All right, I'm going to take some of the questions that I captured from chat as well. All right, so one of our questions is, curious, how many clients should you have as a company before you start thinking about segmenting and tiering customers?
Ooh, that's a good question. Probably when you need more than one CSM, right? That's when I would start thinking about it right away, because it's something that you should constantly revisit and constantly refine and revise as you're taking learnings from the field. But because I think you segment customers not just by ARR, I think you should start thinking about it with your first customer, right? Assessing things like their maturity and where they are in their business, and watching them move through your customer journey and paying attention to those points of friction and where they saw success, because those are the pieces that you're going to want to pull into segmentation, right? So it probably is never too soon to start doing that, but definitely like when you need to have a second CSM is probably a good time, because then you're going to need to start developing different engagement models for those tiers so that you can get ready to scale. Because when you hire a second CSM, the third, fourth, and fifth are coming right behind them, ideally.
All right, we've got 2 minutes left. I'm convinced we're gonna do one more. Okay.
Yeah, love it. I'll talk
All right,
fast.
let's see. I think these two are similar. So oftentimes the person who made the decision of purchase is not the person who we have the relationship with. How do you ask for that person, access to that person, without insulting or offending your contact in a sense of hierarchy?
Yeah, great question. So someone had a relationship with that decision maker, right? Maybe it was the sales team. So there's a couple strategies that you can take, which is getting a warm introduction from the sales team to that individual, or funneling your communication through the salesperson, depending on how your organization approaches things. If it goes from sales to CS and CS owns everything else, then get the introduction. If sales swoops back in and does the renewal, right? Funnel those engagements like you are the quarterback and the orchestrator. So help your salesperson develop that relationship.
Awesome. All right. Without running over, we're going to have to stop there. Lots of great questions. Kate, I might just send some more of these your way in case you're interested in answering them on LinkedIn. But that's a great place to head over, guys, or just reach out to Kate directly if you've got more questions or want to continue to explore this topic further. Kate, thank you so much for your time today. This topic was amazing. Your content was so rich and so thought-provoking. For everybody who attended, I know we got a lot of questions about the presentation and the recording. These will be both available and sent out within 48 hours. Please give me a day or two, but they will be in your inbox shortly thereafter. They will be on our website, so you can head over there. Thank you to everyone who made time for us today, and hopefully you all took a lot away from today's conversation and presentation. If you haven't registered for either our CSM Summit on April 13th, please go ahead and do so. Tell your teams. And again, friendly reminder, our CS Leadership Bootcamp again kicks off next Tuesday. Super thrilled to be back with you guys for another 4 weeks of content. But again, thank you guys so much from me and everyone at ClientSuccess. Thrilled to have these partnerships and continue the conversation. So thank you, everyone. Have a great day.